Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day, there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And we're going to be talking about something today that really is core to you being successful as a business person and as a person. And so please join me in welcoming Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller to our program today. Welcome, Melissa. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Deb. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We're going to have a great chat. So, I was reading your bio and we were chatting a little bit about this before the program. I have 3 degrees and I always think, whoa, that's impressive. I don't even know how many master's degrees you have. You have 2 doctorates. You went to Yale. I mean, all these things, but tell us a little bit more about how it is that you got to where you are today.
Well, it wasn't a straight path. I can say that for a fact. So I was a classical musician and I loved it. I was a French hornist. I loved touring. I loved playing. I loved, doing all the musician stuff. But I discovered as I got a little older that, gigging isn't very stable sometimes, and that I was really fond of food, shelter, and clothing and things like benefits.
Yeah.
So,
a roof.
Yeah. Minor things, being able to afford gas, So I went and got my doctorate and I went out west and I was going to be a professor and I was so excited, because that's kind of the double whammy for musicians to be able to perform and teach.
Right.
But within my very first term of being there, I was actually assaulted by one of my colleagues. And then it got worse. But 7 years later, to make a long story short, I ended up having to leave. And when I left, I ended up having to leave my field in order to leave a really bad situation. And I'd been a music person my whole life.
Right.
I mean, I started playing when I was like 4. So it was hard because there was so much, caught up in who I was and what I did. So when I did have to finally get out, I was really trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. What was so wrong with this system? Because like when I went to my boss, I was told as a junior female faculty member, if I was stirring up trouble, I wasn't going to get tenure.
Right.
And
yeah.
When I
How
went
dare
to his,
you?
Yeah. Then when I went to his boss, I was told if I didn't like it, I should just leave. And the whole system was like that. Nobody wanted to hear what I was trying to say. And it was just like, what is wrong with this? What is wrong with the system that these people aren't people-centered?
Right.
And I mean, I spun out for quite a while, but finally I kept coming back to this idea of there just wasn't any connection. There wasn't any empathy. There wasn't any understanding. So I started studying it. And I was like, okay, we're going to dig in and see what we can figure out. And that just kind of continued to lead me down the path until I got where I'm at now, So
I love it. Yeah, and it's interesting, that's why a lot of people change careers is they've had something very traumatic happen. But unfortunately, your story is not uncommon. And that is one of the issues is, and I think that's part of why people don't report that they have been assaulted because they know there's going to be problems. I had the same thing happen. I was, I worked for a medical clinic and the security guard assaulted me. And when I was told if I didn't shut up, I would be fired. And this is a medical clinic. And I was also, and when I hired an attorney, then things really hit the fan. But more importantly, what I discovered was I was not the only one. And I think that's the issue that comes up so often is it is typically not a one-time incident. And because people will not deal with the situation, it continues. And you're right. I mean, that's the people, and I think it's they don't know how to deal with it because they don't have empathy.
Yes.
And so, define for us what empathy means.
So empathy is one of those things where it's actually a bucket for a lot of different things. We get this I feel what you feel definition a lot.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's one definition, but there's actually 43 different kinds of empathy.
Wow.
Yeah, that's only one.
Mm-hmm.
So really what empathy is about isn't feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Empathy is about human connection and understanding. And that can be through feeling, but it can be cognitively. There's something called cognitive empathy where I understand what you're feeling. I don't feel it. There's self-empathy. There's empathy for groups. There's empathy for nature. We see empathy in animals, primates especially. So the big thing about empathy is to forget that it's about feeling. It is partially about feeling.
Yes, because that's a little woo-woo.
Right. Yes. A little touchy-feely. We don't do that because we don't have feelings in business at all. So yeah, really it's about connection and understanding.
Right. And we were talking before the program that a lot of times people associate empathy with being a more feminine trait.
Yep.
And so because it's feelings, back to what you were saying, even though it's not feelings, that is what people think. And so the manly man, the executives, the leaders, the bosses, the coworkers, whatever, they don't want to have empathy because they don't want to be seen as feminine. And then we have women who also don't want to show empathy because they might think it means that they're not strong, they're not a leader, all of these things. And of course, the best thing is when everybody has empathy.
Yes, absolutely. And I've heard that too. I actually had someone get incensed. I posted about it today and they were like, what? Who's actually saying that? That's a feminine trait. And I'm like, oh, you'd be surprised. It comes up a lot. Actually. And part of it too goes back to that maternal thing that as women, obviously we're the ones that are supposed to be the child caregivers. And so we should be in touch with our children and show empathy and all of that. And it just goes back to just a really outdated mode of thought because it isn't about gender. Children, like newborns, will show, like if one's crying, others will start to cry. And it's kind of a proto-empathy. It's an emotional contagion. And I can tell you that no one's in that room saying, okay, all the girls cry.
Yes. And look at you. What's wrong with you?
Oh, don't do that. Don't do that. So it's a conditioning thing that for whatever reason, I work with leaders and I get that from leaders too. Well, I can't show that I'm soft and weak. Well, being open and vulnerable is going to take a whole lot more courage than trying to appear like a brick wall.
Right. It's interesting. I was talking with a friend of mine who is in Texas, and just yesterday she was at a women's event sponsored by the Dallas Mavericks, the professional men's basketball team. Yeah. And she said, she's done this several years. They have made a point of reaching out to the women, to the female community. And she said, but they always have men there. And she said one year, Tom Brady was there as a speaker because he's a girl dad. And, and she said, it's just so interesting when you have the big manly men that are saying, I got my nails painted by my daughters. Of course, if you're Tom Brady, everybody goes, okie dokie. But, kind of like if Patrick Mahomes were to say it, right? We were talking Chiefs football a little bit ago. But it is not a bad thing. And I think we need to get past that.
Right. Well, and that's where things like cognitive empathy come in because just because you're in a business situation and business has to get done, and it does, that doesn't mean that you can't use empathy. And sometimes cognitive empathy is the best way to go because that means I logically understand what you're feeling. I logically understand what's going on. Don't necessarily feel it. So, that's what I mean by there's all these different kinds of empathy. Emotional empathy might not be appropriate for every situation. That doesn't mean empathy isn't.
Right.
It's just much broader.
And it is something that is so interesting because when you see leaders who have empathy, they're always better leaders,
Yes.
right?
Yes, they are. One of the things that I notice going on right now that is, it's kind of my thing right now, I guess, is everybody's like, use empathy, use empathy, use
Mm-hmm.
empathy. Okay, well, how do I use empathy? Well, I don't
Right.
know. Go out there and use it. Well, what do I do to show empathy? Well, I don't know. Just go do empathy. And it's
Yes.
go do
Yeah.
it. It's like, no, we need to actually teach these people
Mm-hmm.
how to effectively and actively
Mm-hmm.
use
Mm-hmm.
empathy. It's a thing. It's a skill.
Mm-hmm.
It can,
Right.
to a certain degree,
Mm-hmm.
be taught. So, with these leaders, it's like, yes, you're going to be a much better leader if you can
Mm-hmm.
use this. You're
Mm-hmm.
going to be so much more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't just empathy for your customers or
Mm-hmm.
empathy for the board or empathy for your employees. It's
Mm-hmm.
much more
Mm-hmm.
encompassing than
Mm-hmm.
that, you
Right.
know. And I think we missed the ball on that. That's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
just go do empathy. It's natural, right? Well,
Yeah. So
no,
is everyone born with empathy or the ability to have empathy is maybe the better way to put that.
that's a good way to put it,
Mm-hmm.
actually. So statistically, they figure about 92 to 95%
Mm-hmm.
of the population does have it hardwired.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of how we're
Mm-hmm.
born. There is
Right. Like you
biological
said, the one baby cries, the other baby cries.
Yeah. Yeah. The other 5 to 7%, well, those are your dark triad.
Mm-hmm.
And those are going to
Mm-hmm.
be, Machiavellians,
Mm-hmm.
narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have that innate ability
Mm-hmm.
to feel,
Mm-hmm.
but they can learn cognitive empathy.
Ah.
So even if someone has no empathy at all,
Mm-hmm.
they can still be taught.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So
And we see in a lot of leaders, and it kind of comes and goes, but I think we did see a lot of narcissism, a lot of things like that, especially there for quite a long time, and then people realize that's not the good way to lead. And now let's be honest, we've got some situations going on in the world that we have that dark triad, right, of people who are leading again, and and some people like that get stuff done. I mean, it's and so we're not saying okay, this is horrible and this is awful, but at the same point, it's put kind of fear and panic into an awful lot of people.
yeah.
I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who has been a consultant as a marketing person with a company for many years. He's been basically their chief marketing officer, but as in a consultant role, right? He's never worked for them full time. But they deal with all international trade. That's all they do. And he
Wow.
said, so all of a sudden, their bottom line changed by 25% yesterday. And he is waiting for them to say, we don't need you, or we can't need you. Which of course is weird because marketing should be ramping up during times like this, but that's what always happens.
Yeah.
And so I think there are a lot of people who are just scared. And it's, we can all have empathy for those people. Even if you are, that narcissist, that person that just doesn't feel for other people.
Yeah. Oh, you absolutely can. And just because, so we should probably be clear about this. So when we talk about dark triad, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're evil. I mean,
Right.
it's
They're not going to go out
disorder.
and be an axe murderer.
Exactly. In fact, most of them are kind of like functioning dark
Right.
triad. They're part of society.
Right.
And a lot of them even know
Mhm.
that this is how they are
Mhm.
and they behave in a certain way, which again
Right.
points back to the fact that you can learn empathy
Yes.
well enough
Mhm.
to pass.
Mhm.
So, just because and it's not a disorder. That's the other thing.
Right.
People throw around like narcissism all the time. And it's like, no, 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 no. This is a pattern of behavior. It's
Mhm.
a disorder. This
Right.
is just, it lays on that spectrum of behavior.
Mhm.
So yeah, just because someone does tend towards those patterns of
Mhm.
behavior, that doesn't mean that they're going to end up being, serial
Mhm.
killers. It's just, this is part of how it
Mhm.
is. But just like any other behavior, if you can be aware of
Mhm.
how you tend to function and what you tend to
Mhm.
do, then you can actually
Mhm.
function better. You can actually
Mhm.
rise more. You can do more
Mhm.
things. So, and the interesting thing too about dark triad traits is there's some research that says that they may have more of these people in positions of power, like maybe up
Mhm.
to 25%.
Right.
And,
Mhm.
we're talking heads of companies. We're talking, heads of medical facilities, surgeons. We're talking people in politics. We're talking those people that really aspire to those super high positions. So if people think they may see some of these traits in some of these positions, it's quite possible.
Right. Well, and I think that we, just like everybody has empathy, I think we all have some of these traits that crop up on occasion, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just like you said, it's knowing it, recognizing it, and going, oh, shouldn't be acting like that. Or, okay, in this situation, it's okay to act like that. Whatever it is. But again, it's self-awareness. And I think that's the other thing that people are afraid of. And which is kind of understandable, right? I don't want to know what makes me tick.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's a lot more comfortable to believe that you're the illusion that you've created in your mind,
right,
than to actually take a moment and take a look and go, oh, maybe there are warts and all of there.
Right.
It's not comfortable.
Well, and self-awareness then quite often means that you're going to take responsibility for your own actions. Right. And that's really hard. We like to blame everybody else for what's going on. Yes. And it's always a choice.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing it's interesting. I've been studying up on this because I'm taking some coaching training, and and so it's it's still a choice. Yes. It might not be the choice you want, might be the choice other people want, but it is still your choice.
Yes, absolutely. And we need to be very aware of that, especially as leaders, because I tell them, you are always on stage. I can't get rid of the music stuff. I just can't, right. You take the girl out of music, but you ain't taking the music out.
You're doing a TED talk on that not too long.
I am. I'm really excited about that.
I saw your website. I looked.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's exactly where I'm going with that. But I mean, for people in these positions, you are always on stage, which means someone is always watching. And even if you think you're portraying a certain thing, or you think you're hiding something, someone knows. And the other part of that too is, if you're in a leadership position, there will always be people that are going to emulate that.
Right.
Well, which do you want them to emulate?
Right. And let's be honest, I think probably you said, 25%. We've probably, I would guess, pretty much any of us have had one of those icky bosses.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, like I worked for one gentleman, and it was funny. We were candy brokers. My father thought this was the coolest job in the world, because he would get cases of chocolate, but the owner of the company was not a healthy man from a physical aspect. I mean, probably 400 pounds, right? We sold candy. And so self-esteem issues, all of those things. And he would travel, business pleasure. And he would call the office 5 minutes before we were supposed to open and 5 minutes after we opened to see if we were there. Right. And it was like, really, I'm not a 4-year-old, and I mean, there were times where we wouldn't answer on purpose just to freak him out. Or, the other people would say, yeah, she's here, but she's down in the bathroom. And I'm just sitting there working away, whatever, but part of that was he had to be in control. And I think we see that with people is when there are things that there are not under their own control, then they tend to overcompensate with other things.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things I see with the people that I work with is a lot of these people that have gotten into leadership positions haven't necessarily gotten there because they're great leaders. They've gotten there because they're the best technician, or they're pulling the biggest contracts, or the best salesperson.
Right.
So they get into this leadership position, and they know they're not the best leader.
Right. And they're thinking, holy cow, what am I doing?
Right. And now they're like, wow, I feel really inferior about this. I feel like I'm an imposter. Okay, well then it's going to be my way, and I'm going to show you that I can, So they're dealing with their own unawareness of imposter syndrome and of feeling like they're failing and all this stuff. And instead of facing this through a little bit of self-reflection and self-awareness, they're instead taking it out through their leadership style on everybody else.
Right.
Now they're in a command and control style of leadership, and everybody hates life.
Right. And I mean, that as you said, that frequently happens. Somebody gets promoted. but then they're not given the tools to do the job.
Right. Yes, exactly. And they haven't had the tools all the way
Mhm.
up, from
They didn't
managers.
need them. Mhm.
No, well, but I would argue
Maybe.
that maybe
Yeah.
they did. I
Mhm.
mean, because one thing about those leadership skills is
Mhm.
whether you're leading others or you're just leading
Mhm.
yourself, that's
Mhm.
something you learn and practice
Mhm.
starting from junior manager
Mhm.
to junior
Mhm.
VP to C-suite to
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
And by not giving people these tools, we're
Mhm.
doing them a huge
Mhm.
disservice.
Mhm.
In a lot of European countries, they teach what's called social emotional intelligence.
Ah.
So that they actually are teaching kids these
Mhm.
pro-social skills,
Mhm.
leadership being one, empathy
Mhm.
being one,
Mhm.
and teach them starting as young as like 6 and all the way up to
Mhm.
16, so
Mhm.
that then they can you actually use these
Mhm.
skills. And we don't do that here,
No, no.
you know?
And you look at it now, I don't have kids. But when I look at how I see people being raised, I think there is an awful lot of the you have to be tough, you have to be successful.
Yeah.
And especially for men. I'm a baby boomer, and so I was taught that the women had to be subservient, and that went over real well, because my mother was far from that, and so she was not going to put up with that.
Good for
But
you.
yeah, and so, but yeah, and I mean, just like when itty bitty little boys don't cry,
Yep.
little girls go off and play with their dolls,
Yep.
little boys play sports where they beat the living daylights out of each other, but then they are good friends, and little girls are taught to hold grudges. I mean, all of these various things, right? We're not
Yep.
taught how to and because it comes back to, are we, we don't want our children to be weak, we want them to be successful, all of those things, and people aren't realizing that they're teaching them unhealthy skills.
Yes. Yes. And skills that are going to hold them back.
Right.
So I'm Gen X, so I'm a little bit younger
Mm-hmm.
than you, but my
Mm-hmm.
parents were very much the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, you will be ladylike.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I hate that word because I heard it so often, ladylike.
Ah, mm-hmm.
Like, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but
Yeah.
yeah, my mom, all she wanted me to do was go be a secretary.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I didn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what
Right.
you
Mm-hmm.
want to do, that's fine. But the
Mm-hmm.
point was that she had already decided what my path
Mm-hmm.
was supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
based on my gender.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes no sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
And we are socially conditioned in those
Mm-hmm.
ways, and I think societally we've gone away from some of it,
Mm-hmm.
but societally we still have a ways to go.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know?
And even, if it's just acknowledging things and saying, hey, you should be doing this. Um, you know, uh, the other day I was talking to a very cute little girl. And of course, the
Uh,
first thing you wanted to say was, oh, aren't you so cute? Um, and, but my rational brain kicked in and I said, and I bet you're really smart too. And her
Good.
mother, ooh, I mean, thought that was pretty cool. And and it shows, how are we treating people? Are we encouraging them to be the cute, smart little girl, the little boy that, oh my gosh, might play with a doll, or might say, oh my gosh, Melissa, you fell down. Are you okay? Just simple things like that start when, as you said, when they're very little.
Yes. And that's exactly where we start getting these ideas that empathy belongs to little girls. Go play house with your dolls, and it doesn't belong to little boys
Mhm.
because you don't cry and you play these sports, and there's no crying in baseball
Right.
or
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah. Whatever. I think it was yes. No crying in baseball. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And so we do condition that in.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas some of these other countries,
Mm-hmm.
like the top 10 happiest countries, the Gallup poll with the top 10 happiest, it's always like Iceland and Denmark, and
Mm-hmm.
they teach social emotional intelligence starting
Yes. Mm-hmm.
very young.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, maybe one doesn't lead to the other, but on the other hand,
Mm-hmm.
whatever they're doing seems to be
Mm-hmm.
working.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Maybe we should give it a shot. What have
Mm-hmm.
we got to
Mm-hmm.
lose?
Right.
You
And of course, the issue is that when we get so caught up in all of these, we're not happy.
Right.
And we're not happy with our jobs, our careers, our family, or whatever it is.
Yes.
And and that just, then it's this vicious circle, whatever we want to call it.
Yep. Yep. I agree. I think at the end, it comes down to that authenticity of
Mm-hmm.
being able to be who I am,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that is.
Right.
It doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, that's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the piece that's missing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is lost through not being able to connect as well. Because
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not connected to you, then I'm going to put stereotypes on you based on
Mm-hmm.
what I see, as
Right.
opposed to authentically connecting
Mm-hmm.
with you, understanding who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of a champion for the cause. Just that I
Mm-hmm.
think, I don't think we're using empathy
Mm-hmm.
well in our society. And I think
Right.
we're missing the power
Mm-hmm.
that it holds for connection
Mm-hmm.
and understanding.
Right.
But I look at these things and I'm like, if we could just understand each other as humans,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't mean I have to love everybody.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean I even have to like
Mm-hmm.
everybody, but I understand
Mm-hmm.
what's going on
Mm-hmm.
and understand the authenticity that's
Mm-hmm.
behind it, and that everybody's just trying to be the best that they can be
Mm-hmm.
with the tools that they have
Right.
today. And that's
Right.
it.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Yeah.
all just human beings being human.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's interesting. I interviewed a 15-year-old for the podcast several weeks ago,
Oh, cool.
in Pakistan. So it was this great conversation. Smart kid. Oh my. And one of the things he wants to do when he grows up, and we talked religion. I mean, it made sense because he's in Pakistan, and so he was saying he is Muslim,
Mhm.
and but the school that he attends is a virtual school. And so they're being exposed to people from around the world, and so he was talking about how great that was. He wants to build an app that helps us to not judge other people. Now, I'm
Oh,
not sure how he's going to do that, but isn't that just the coolest thing in the world?
it is. And I would love to see that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Man.
Yeah. Well, and and he said specifically based on religion, and things like that. But yeah, it just, and I don't know, maybe it's, your phone shocks you, if you're starting to say something that's wrong, or, or a little happy face appears when you're doing well. I don't know what it is, but I thought that is such an interesting concept.
Yeah.
Is, and, but I don't know what it says that we'd have to rely on technology to have to do that for us.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I talk about is that judgment and empathy cannot exist in the same space.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that someone is trying to combat that judgment,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm not sure that I need a wrist shocker, I don't,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the discussions that we're in
Mm-hmm.
now about AI being able to
Mm-hmm.
show empathy and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Right.
Where,
Mm-hmm.
AI is a fantastic tool, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's not discerning enough.
And the fact that when it does kind of show some empathy, it's a little freaky. I'm expecting for it to call me how.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been working with AI to develop some marketing materials
Mhm.
for the coaching business, and it's a cancer coaching business. So, and so it's, I've been working with it, and it will say, this is such a great goal for you to have. Let me know how I can help. It's like, okay.
See, that scares me because that's actually going into what's called pseudo empathy,
Mm-hmm.
which is where
Right.
you're going through the motions of
Mm-hmm.
showing what kind of looks
Right.
like
They
empathy.
programmed it in there to say that, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's like, but it's not empathy. It's manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
It's emotional manipulation, and
Right.
as long as you understand that, it's
Yeah. Oh yeah.
you know,
And we were talking about, I've been talking with several people about the fact that Chat GPT has an app on the phone where you can just carry on conversations with it.
yeah,
And that young man that I was talking about before says he will do that for 10, 15 minutes at least every day, where he just has conversations with Chat GPT about the world. And now, like I said, smart kid. He first of all realizes it is technology. It could be
yes,
wrong, all of those various things. But then, and I don't know, maybe I had a look, because he said, I know I should be talking to real people more. And I was like,
yes,
yeah,
yeah, because they're not going to be on an algorithm.
mm-hmm, right. But yeah, it was very interesting. And I think that is kind of one of the things that we're dealing with. It is one of the things we're dealing with AI is when it starts to cross that line of, and I mean, like, I know somebody was telling me they'd named their chat GPT. I didn't even know you could do that. Now, I mean, I changed Siri's voice to be an Australian male, so maybe that's the same concept. Right.
We have the technology.
Yeah, I know, but it's just kind of weird, but it comes back to what we were saying earlier. When a person has false empathy, we can pick it out pretty fast. Yes. And I think that's something that, people need to realize is, okay, if I'm not feeling it, don't fake it.
Yes. Yes. Well, and that's where you can kick into cognitive empathy. I'm not feeling it.
Right.
But I still
get that you might be upset or,
right.
Scared, whatever it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One other misconception people have a lot is that in order to have empathy, you have to have had the exact situation.
Yes.
Like, I don't know what it is because I'm sorry that your mom died. Mm-hmm. My mom hasn't died. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But that's not the case. You don't have to recognize the situation. Mm-hmm. You just have to recognize the feeling.
Right.
So, or be able to at least logically say, okay, my mom, I never had that happen, but I do remember when I had a pet pass. I remember the loss when I lost a job. I do remember when my partner broke up with me and I had that profound loss. And I'm not feeling it, but I do get it.
Right. And I think we need to see that, there've been a heck of a lot of people who have lost their jobs, right?
Yes.
And, and that happens. Whether you get a new boss, sometimes you'll lose your job. I mean, that's been happening in corporate America for a very long time. Yeah. But at the same point, it is kind of that cognitive empathy to go, okay, I understand that now you're worried about how you're going to cope, how you're going to feed your family, all of those things. I might not have ever gone through that, but I understand that you are, right. And that's where then we see, especially in corporate America, where they offer training programs and all sorts of things like that to help people who are being laid off. But even if it's, I'm sorry, Melissa, you're fired, you can still have empathy for them. Because now, granted, there are times where it's nope, you're leaving now, because there are situations. Yes. But frequently we still need to have that empathy.
Yes. And I mean, as part of business and even as part of life, having empathy doesn't mean you don't have boundaries.
Yes.
So business has to get done. It's
right.
not a volunteer situation. And unfortunately, sometimes that means things have to be done.
Right.
Maybe not everybody loves. Those boundaries are there, but there's a way to do it that's humane. And there's a way to do it that proves that maybe humanity has a ways to go. Yeah, because people seem to think that with empathy, you're just like a pushover and you take it.
Yes, you're going to cry.
I'm going to be the doormat. And it's like, no. Having empathy doesn't mean you don't have boundaries.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that's so important in all of this too is emotional intelligence.
Yes.
So talk to us about that. What does that mean? And why is that so important?
Oh, that's huge. Boy, you're touching all the hot buttons for me today. Thank you. Yes, because that's actually what I teach. So I study empathy and I work with empathy, but what I do is I teach leaders how to use empathy to tap into emotional intelligence.
Okay.
So in the past, like with Daniel Goleman and some of the work that's gone before, your emotional intelligence is a big tool bag and it's got everything in there from motivation to the ability to interrelate, to communication, to whatever. And in the past, empathy was put in that tool bag.
Right.
But I think you actually have to have empathy first, or you don't know what you're reaching in that tool bag for.
Okay.
You haven't connected with your people. You don't know whether you're reaching in that tool bag for a saw or a left-handed screwdriver. So I believe the empathy has to come first. And that's a little different than we've conceived of this in the past. So, but emotional intelligence, that's another one. It actually started an article in 1990. So it's been 35 years and we still haven't been able to figure out how to integrate this, solidly in all of these different organizations. And I think it's because we're not using empathy well enough to be able to tap into that connection before we start digging
Mhm.
into that tool bag.
Right. So, if a leader has emotional intelligence, how's that going to manifest itself?
The thing with emotional intelligence and those soft skills and that ability to interrelate with people is there's an understanding there that organizations start and end with people. I
Mhm.
don't care if it's production, I don't care if it's medicine, I don't care if it's academia. There are people there, and those
Mhm.
people are going to be the ones that are going
Mhm.
to really make or break that company or organization or whatever.
Mhm.
And we'll take it from mediocre to stratospheric.
Mhm.
With emotional intelligence, you're actually able to connect with those people, to understand those
Mhm.
people, communicate with those people,
Mhm.
to motivate those people. You understand both singly in some
Mhm.
cases and as a group,
Mhm.
where the drivers are, where the
Mhm.
levers are, how you can lead, how you can motivate,
Mhm.
what these different people
Mhm.
need. And now, because of that emotional intelligence, you're leveling everything
Mhm.
up. Because that's the point Daniel Goleman made in his book in 95, that emotional intelligence is so much more important
Mhm.
than IQ. EQ
Mhm.
means so much more than IQ
Yes.
because
Mhm.
IQ will only take you so far.
Mhm.
EQ is what allows you to
Mhm.
level up stratospherically.
Mhm.
Because at the
Right.
end of the day, it's all about people.
Mhm. Right. And sometimes it's small.
Yeah.
Um, Back when I still worked in corporate America, my boss, and we were a large company, and we had to wear ID badges, right? And
Uh-huh.
it had your picture on it and it had your name. And he calls me in and he says, "We need to redo the ID badges." I mean, okay. I was like,
Yeah. Whatever.
whatever. And he said, "I want the first name of every person." He said, "I want to be able to be 6 feet away and be able to read it." And I was still kind of like, okay. And and this man was a smart man because he said, "I from 6 feet away, I want to be able to call somebody by their first name." Because we all love hearing our first name and we really love knowing that the CEO knows our first name.
Yes.
And it was really funny because people were like, "Why are you changing the name badges?" Well, I wasn't going to tell them. I didn't want to ruin his fun.
Yeah.
And nobody got it. I mean, they didn't, it wasn't, I don't think anybody really figured out it's so your first name can be more easily read. And but then it would throw him like when somebody had their name badge attached like to the bottom of their shirt or something like that. And he's kind of going, to read it. But he really did know how important it was just to call somebody by their first name.
Yes. And you probably saw the loyalty shoot up.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
saw the morale shoot
Right.
up. People liked being there because
Mm-hmm.
they felt valued.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an example of the opposite of that, which is something that I actually just saw happen.
Oh
I,
no.
I was working with this health system,
Mm-hmm.
and the CEO wants to have an early morning meeting,
Mm-hmm.
which, okay, because you've got first shift, second shift, third
Mm-hmm.
shift, you've got physicians, you've got staff, you've got all these people.
Mm-hmm.
So she schedules it at 7 in the morning so that, the night crew isn't quite so put out and the day crew can get there and this
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. Right. And then the night before, she cancels it
Oh no.
because because she wants to be there for her kids' first day of school,
Okay.
never considering that maybe her people want to be there for the kids' first day of school and they have
Aha.
arranged it to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And like the third shift has arranged to be there, the second shift has arranged
Mm-hmm.
to be there. Everybody has worked all of
Mm-hmm.
their schedule around to be there for her,
Mm-hmm.
but she's going to cancel at the last minute for something that maybe they also wanted and she never considered.
Mm-hmm.
And the morale went yoink, and she had no idea why.
Right. Now, yeah, because I was going to say, well, but when she told them, they probably went, "Oh," like I just did, right? Oh, um, but yeah, it didn't occur to me that everybody would have said, "But we wanted that too," and you
Yeah.
took it away from us, or you didn't give us the opportunity for it.
Yes, exactly. Because she had put her thoughts of what she wanted
Mm-hmm.
ahead of, well, but my people might want that too.
Right.
Well, what about all these different shift workers that are, making time to come in for this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, but these people all have kids as well. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, she emotionally didn't make that
Mm-hmm.
connection. And she's not a bad person. I
Right.
mean, when it was brought up, she was legitimately stunned, but it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, this is where your emotional intelligence
Yeah.
isn't.
Okay. So how do you fix that?
It takes self-reflection and self-awareness and an ability to be able to say, I need to think about other people when I
Mm-hmm.
make these decisions, and not just on a bottom line kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing, that these are people, that
Mm-hmm.
they're going to have the same needs and wants that I
Mm-hmm.
have,
Mm-hmm.
that they're going to want the same things that I do.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to think of this collectively
Mm-hmm.
and not just as I'm going to do what I want and everybody needs to
Mm-hmm.
follow, because it's a command and control style of leadership.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And that comes back to also they need to say they're sorry. And
Oh,
how
yeah.
many times do we not see that? Because again, that's a weakness.
Right.
And, if they would say, I'm sorry, I screwed up, that
Yes.
goes so far. But again, we have to know they mean it. And we can tell when they don't. But yeah, if
Yes.
they say, I'm really sorry, I screwed up,
Yes.
I'll make it up to you. Then people are like, okay. Now if
Yeah.
it happens multiple times, then it loses its effect, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know why. And we're all like that. We don't want to
Yeah.
admit that we screwed up. Or, we just, well, they know. Don't they know that I feel bad?
She
No.
had no idea. She was completely
Mhm,
clueless to the whole thing. And
mhm,
that's the other thing with empathy, is that when it's working well,
mhm,
it actually goes in both directions.
mhm,
So, if this leader would have been like, I'm really sorry.
mhm,
I didn't take into consideration
mhm,
your needs with your kids, and that
mhm,
you were giving this all this up for
mhm,
me, and I'm really sorry.
mhm,
You're going to be more likely to have more empathy for that leader and say, well, you know what? They're only a human being.
mhm.
Human beings are going to make mistakes.
Right.
And it's cool.
Mhm,
It's over now, and
mhm,
and we understand and accept your apology.
mhm,
So once again, everybody's watching. So if
mhm.
you show
Right.
it, they're probably going to be more likely to give it back.
Mhm, mhm. Right. And when it's not showing a weakness, it's not
No.
showing any of those things
Nope.
that people assume it does. I one of the things that I do is crisis communications,
Uh-huh.
and I always tell the businesses, eh, tell them you're sorry.
Yeah.
That is not the same as saying it's my fault.
Right.
And because then that whole legal thing gets in there, right?
Right.
And so yeah, I can say, oh my gosh, Melissa, I am so sorry that you just fell down those flight of stairs. I'm really sorry that you did. Now maybe you fell down the flight of stairs because I had bad stairs, so I don't want to say it's my fault, because then you're going to sue
Yes.
me, right? um
Yes.
but
Yep.
yeah, it is, when we have that empathy. And so it's funny, because a lot of what I do is I do social media for them, and invariably you have somebody who's not happy,
Yeah.
and I tell them, worst thing is to ignore it, because then it festers, right? And then
Yes.
you get the posts that are Saturday morning when they've had one too many drinks, and all of these things. And I tell them, okay, we're going to say, we're going to respond as quickly as possible. And I tell them, the thing is, it's not for them, it's for everybody else who reads this, because these are online comments, right? And so the first thing we're going to say is, we're really sorry that this happened. Here's, if and it might be some of the things, are here are the steps that we're taking to alleviate it. But we also always say, we always encourage you to speak to whoever, the executive director, the manager, whoever it is.
Yeah.
And if they're mad at that person, then we give them the level higher than that. But in all my years, knock on wood, I've never had anybody come back and say, yeah, but, and carry it any further, because we pulled, we deflated their balloon. They would look petty and nasty if they respond again. But yeah, it really is. It's just, saying we're sorry and we're going
Yeah.
to try and do better.
Yes. And that's very human.
Mhm.
That's all any of us really do, is just try to do better next
Mhm.
time. So why would it be any difference
Mhm.
organizationally?
Right. So how does a manager recognize, like you were talking about that woman,
Mhm.
how do they recognize, I need help? you know and because I mean, that we were talking about self-awareness,
Yeah.
how do they even realize, because this has been working for them, they got promoted, they're the CEO, they're the owner of the company, they're the whatever, how how are they going to come to the realization that I need to change something?
Usually it happens in one of two ways. Either something goes so far south
Mm-hmm.
that people are saying you need to get somebody and you need to get them now, or
Mm-hmm.
we're voting you out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I actually see this happen with physicians,
Ah.
surgeons, those
Mm-hmm.
kind of people,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like you need to get help and it has to happen soon, or we're going to terminate your contract or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, usually in that case, it still isn't a lot of self-awareness, but
Mm-hmm.
they understand there might be enough on the line that they're going to try to at least employ enough cognitive empathy to get things worked out.
Mm-hmm.
The other one are usually people that are already doing a little bit of self-reflection and they have an
Okay.
inkling that something isn't quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's reflecting either in their bottom line,
Mm-hmm.
in the innovation, in their productivity,
Mm-hmm.
in employee satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
They have like these clues that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, okay, maybe things aren't bad, but things could be better.
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, usually it's because of culture.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have people say, our culture, I don't understand why the culture is like this. What would you suggest?
Right.
And then we go back to the self-reflection and the self-awareness. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about how you handled this last meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the town hall meetings you're having that half of your employees can't be there because they're on the production floor
Mm-hmm.
and you're making them feel unvalued. Let's talk about how you have yourself, behind a door with a gatekeeper.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, you're busy, and yes, your time is very, very valuable, but your employees haven't seen you in
Mm-hmm.
6 years. And so they feel unvalued. Your no,
Mm-hmm.
like, and trust factor is
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
So usually it's one or the other. Either, something catastrophic has
Mm-hmm.
happened, or there's an inkling.
Mm-hmm.
Once in a while, I'll get someone that someone else has said, you really maybe need to look at this.
Yeah, you
And
pots.
yeah, it does happen on occasion, but those people usually are the ones that are going to be like, no, there's nothing wrong with what I'm
Mhm.
doing. And
Yeah, and you're fired.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
It's everybody else. It's not
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. That's right.
Mhm.
Everybody else. Uh-huh.
Right.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah. And again, it really is some simple things, that boss that I was talking about. And I don't know what happened where he all of a sudden started doing these things. And it was funny because 17-story building, C-suite was, of course, the 17th floor. Now I was up there a lot in my role, but we had people who probably had been with that company for 20 years and had never been on that floor. And all sorts of things. But something happened because that was we're going to do the name bit. And then he started walking the floors, and we had cubicles, right? And so,
Okay.
the walls were only 5 feet tall. He was a fairly tall man, and he started just walking the floor, scared everybody half to death, right?
Yeah,
Oh my
at
God,
first,
why is he here? He's here to fire me.
yeah, at first that's what happens. It's oh no, what's wrong? Oh my God, they're downsizing. There's something going on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I'm like celebrating that comment because that's one of the first
Mm-hmm.
things I tell people to do.
Mm-hmm.
I tell make your
Mm-hmm.
rounds. You don't
Yes.
have to
Mm-hmm.
chat with everybody. You don't have to spend hours.
Yeah.
Just go see and be
Mm-hmm.
seen.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. If you have a company cafeteria, eat there.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be every meal or
Oh,
but show up there on occasion, and maybe hold court, right?
yeah.
And but come down. We talk about the ivory tower, right? Come down from that ivory tower and be where people are. And it's funny because that same boss, and I've talked about this on the program before. Once a week, he went down to the mail room and he'd spend at least an hour down there. And now the mailroom guys were pretty cool, right? We all like talking to the mailroom guys, but
Yeah.
this CEO also knew that the mailroom guys had their finger on the pulse of the company because they went around talking to all the admins and they'd hang out in the cafeteria, all these various things. And he was smart enough to pay attention to what they said. And there were things like, we shouldn't hold meetings at X time because half the people are gone, or hold multiple meetings, and all of these things because these people, these and it was gentlemen, but these gentlemen knew what was going on. They had their finger on the pulse, and this CEO was smart enough to ask them.
And that's brilliant. And that is emotional intelligence. He understood
Right.
that by making this connection, even a
Mhm.
peripheral
Mhm.
connection, but
Right.
he's making that connection. And by
Mhm.
doing, I mean, he's totally increasing his
Mhm.
cred.
Mhm.
He's making these people feel valued.
Mhm.
And the more he interacts with them, the
Right.
more he does value them.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's better for the entire
Mhm.
organization
Right.
because now
Mhm.
those people, their morale is up.
Mhm.
And now they're talking to
Mhm.
other people
Right.
and they're like, oh yeah, we work for this great boss. And
Mhm.
now their morale goes up.
Mhm.
And then those people talk to, and
Mhm.
that's how it
Right.
works.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was really funny because I ran the communications, the employee and internal and external communications,
Mhm.
and so I would have staff tell me, I'm too scared to go tell him, but I'll go tell the guys in the mailroom because they knew that it would get passed on, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like I'm gonna, put the suggestion in the suggestion box because somebody will read it. But they knew, we all knew, everybody in the company knew that, if you, and there's usually somebody like that, right? Maybe it's the
Yes.
receptionist, maybe it's, and I tell people quite frequently the leader of the company never has that title. And those are the people you got to make sure you're on the right side of. I work with a lot of people who are in the job market, and I tell them, do not ever annoy the receptionist and treat them with respect, because a real good person who's doing the interviews will go out and say, how were you treated?
Yes.
Did they say thank you to you? I mean, like, I know people, I had somebody one time say, hey, we canceled a huge contract with a client because they were rude to wait staff in a restaurant. And they said, and if they're rude to those people, they're going to be rude to everybody.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of that, how are you treating the people who, in some cases, people are thinking of are a lower level? Well, those people might actually be the highest level.
Well, yes, because they're the ones that make things run.
Mm-hmm.
I
Right.
mean, there's no upper or lower level. This is
Mm-hmm.
this is an organization.
Mm-hmm.
It's an organism.
Mm-hmm.
All things have to work in order to
Right.
make this
And
thing
they're all
go.
kind of bubbling around in there.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And that's
Mm-hmm.
like, I think it was Tony Hsieh, the head of Zappos,
Mm-hmm.
that that would actually plant people. Like they would make it
Mm-hmm.
so that people coming in for interviews would have to shuttle in,
Mm-hmm.
and he would actually plant people on this shuttle just
Ah.
to see how
Mm-hmm.
incoming
Mm-hmm.
candidates would act.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Mm-hmm.
their emotional intelligence wasn't high
Mm-hmm.
enough to treat
Mm-hmm.
everybody well,
Right.
he wouldn't hire them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was
Yeah.
brilliant.
So they blew it before they ever
Yeah.
even got there. And
Yes.
and maybe it was just something as simple as they didn't give up their seat to the pregnant woman, or whatever. And but yeah, how do you treat that receptionist? And you and I were talking about this before we started recording. Say please, say thank you. It's not
Yeah.
going to hurt you to do that, but it might really make somebody's day just to acknowledge their presence, right?
Yes, especially in a society now where
Mm-hmm.
we're dealing with a loneliness
Mm-hmm.
epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
We're dealing with a lot of estrangement between people
Mm-hmm.
because of technology.
Mm-hmm.
Those little, was it Society of Human Resource Management was talking
Mm-hmm.
about incivility epidemic in
Mm-hmm.
workplaces.
Right.
I mean, that's where we would begin,
Mm-hmm.
is just by treating humans as
Mm-hmm.
humans. Thank you and a please go a
Mm-hmm.
long way.
Right. Right. And eye contact and all those, and
Yeah.
maybe they're waiting on you, they're the barista at Starbucks or whatever,
Yeah.
but you can still say, how are you doing today? All of those various things. And it's funny because I always try and do that. Now, am I perfect? No, because I get sidetracked, I get busy, I get, I'm cranky or whatever. But I get somebody on the phone and I always say, how's your day going? And usually they pause, right? Because
Yeah.
they were not expecting that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if they say it back to me or not. It's a person on the other end. And
Yes.
that does kind of come back to AI. Are we going to be giving up some of these things, to have AI do them, but we're losing that personal touch?
Yes. And in fact, we're giving it up on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind
Right.
of,
Yeah, the chat bots and all of those things.
yes.
I take great delight in screwing them up. and then they finally, the little bot will finally say, I'm going to get you a person. I'm sorry. And then I'm okay with it. But yeah, it's, and it doesn't make life easier. Yes. Does it make life better? Maybe not.
I don't know. Because there are times when I just want to do something quickly and it's easy to get on the web and just crank it out or whatever. But there are times when I really need help. And the amount of time that I spend trying to get through a queue and try to get a hold of like a person, by the time
we're doing the screaming at the phone, person.
Yes, exactly. I'm like, yes. And it's not helping us with our human connection.
No.
Technology has run beyond what we as human beings are able to really take in and comprehend. And it's making us sicker as a society.
Right. And maybe I'm Pollyanna, but I think it will adjust. We'll figure out, okay, the first 5 levels of questions that somebody has, okay, that can be an automated thing. Yeah. But then they need a person. Yes. Or whatever it is, and because you're right, and I don't expect companies to be there 24/7. I mean, all of those things, but when I want a person, I want a person.
Yes. Yes. And I promise I won't bug you if I don't need one. Right. Because I'm just as happy to go to the web and do something if that's what I can do.
Yep. Yeah. To Google it, right?
Yeah.
Well, oh my gosh, we are at the top of the hour and this has been so much fun. I think we need to have you on again because this is such an important topic. And hopefully people will be thinking, is that me? Oh, oops. Yeah. And so if they are, how do they find you and what are the services that you provide?
So the best place to find me is on my website, and that is EQ Empathy. And I call it that because it's a lot easier than saying EQ through the lens of empathy. So it's just EQ via empathy. And all of my links are up there. You can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on Instagram, you can find me on the usuals, but it also has like a question sheet for anybody that wants to talk to me. I am an author. I do have a book coming out, probably early summer, beginning of June, which
we'll have you on again to talk about the book.
Yeah, because it's called The Empathic Leader. So that would be a good one. And that's where they can find me. I have that coming out. I do speaking. I do public speaking. I have a TEDx coming up in April, which is fantastic. Scream. So, yep. And I do. Yes, I know. I try not to be wiggly about it, but I kind of am. And I do coaching. I do one-on-one leadership coaching because if I'm working with people, I want to be able to really dig in on what they need. And that means understanding their interpersonal relationships. But more and more, I'm not actually working with top-level leaders. I'm working with middle managers.
Oh, I love that.
They connect both up and down, and they're the ones that are someday going to be the top level. So this gives them time to practice their skills.
I love it.
Yeah, EQ via empathy. Check me out there, and I'm happy to connect with anybody.
Perfect. And we'll have the link to it in the show notes. This really has been so much fun. And, like I said, we'll have you back on when the book goes. Excuse me. But until then, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
Charity begins at home. You have got to be able to have self-reflection through self-empathy if you expect to have it for anybody else. So start at home.
I love it. Well, I'm Deb Creer. I've been having so much fun talking with Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.